Our first interview is with somebody who I'm sure is going to get a massive cheer when she comes up. Emily Schrader. Good to see you. Good. Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining us. I first met you at Mornington Crescent, and there will be a number of people in this room who were involved on one of the very first activities that, as they were called then, Enough is Enough organized. So you were there with a megaphone, making speeches, doing chants, generally...
I think I lost my voice that day.
Yes, I think you did. Counter-protesting against a little march that was there. So I just thought, this is Emily, and we went to the pub afterwards, we all had a drink, and this is Emily the activist. But then later I saw Emily on Israeli TV. So it turns out Emily the activist is also Emily the journalist. She's an anchor on TV in Israel. She's written books, she frequently writes articles. This week she's been on the TV in Britain, talking about the Manchester attacks at the synagogue in Manchester, and of course October the 7th. So she's an amazing person to talk to because she is incredibly knowledgeable, but equally she's quite happy to get out there and lose her voice for the cause. So please welcome Emily.
Thank you.
So, do you mind if I start with probably a tough question? So the other evening, Stop the Hate organized a very impressive vigil for October the 7th. There were lots of very powerful speakers. And I think during Tikva, I looked over and you were crying. I was the other side, and I just happened to look up, and you were crying. Would you tell us what that was all about?
Yeah, I'm going to try not to cry tonight. But I have to say it's very, very difficult. First and foremost, because I can't believe, oh, now I'm going to cry. I can't believe that it's been 2 years, and we still have 48 hostages in Gaza. And it's the culmination, I think, of hearing these stories and knowing a lot of these families, reporting every single awful thing that has happened in the last 2 years on the news, interviewing them, having to live stream the return of these hostages in those disgusting ceremonies that Hamas put on of returning, in some cases, bodies of children that they kidnapped and murdered, and the betrayal that I think everyone here probably understands from countries like the UK, from even the United States, throughout Europe we've seen this, and throughout the world. Canada as well, Australia, seen some of the worst anti-Semitism over the last 2 years. And you would think that after the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, after the butchering, the barbaric torture and sexual violence against innocent civilians, 378 of which were murdered at the Nova Festival. 1,195 were murdered total on October 7th, including more than 50 children. 250 people were kidnapped and taken into Gaza to massive celebration in the streets. I don't know if we have some of the footage. I think we'll display it later, but I have some of the footage that came through on that day as it really happened. And it's just, I broke down because it shouldn't be this way. And
it shouldn't be 2 years, you mean?
It shouldn't be this way. It shouldn't be that I am afraid to be who I am, or to wear this necklace, or to wave an Israeli flag in the entire United Kingdom. It's obscene. And we should never accept this as something normal.
Absolutely. But it's interesting, though, that on recent campaigning that we've done, we've actually found a lot of support for Israel. So would you draw a distinction between, say, what the government's doing and what the trade unions are doing and perhaps ordinary people? Or are you finding, you say you wouldn't wear your outward signs, for example, on a tube, or would you?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't, right. And would that be because you feel a general tension, or are you just worried about certain people popping up? Is there something?
Well, I think we all know who we're worried about popping up, especially today. You know, sitting across from me on the way to the pro-Hamas protest that occurred today, there were people, you know, walking around without a care in the world with Palestinian flags and Palestinian pins. And that's what made me think of it today, because I thought, like, why is it that I'm afraid of the country that I live in, the movement that is essentially a civil rights movement for the most historically oppressed minority in the history of mankind? Why am I afraid of being who I am? Well, these people who are bullies that are supporting rapists and murderers and kidnappers, literally, sadly it's not an exaggeration, why am I the person who's afraid here? This is the epitome of the failure of the state. And it's not just in the UK. It's in Germany, it's in Italy, it's in France, it's in parts of the United States, it's in Canada, it's Australia. It's unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable. And no one should be silent about it. And you mentioned, you know, we've also seen some support, and I think that's really true. We've seen a lot of people like yourself, like the work that Our Fight does, really rise up in response to what's happened. And of course, as it's probably my number one focus as a journalist and as an activist, Iranians. We've seen tremendous We've seen a tremendous outpouring of support from October 7th onward. I mean, I can't even tell you how many messages of support I got from inside Iran on October 7th itself. The first people to respond, the first people to say, we know your pain, we know what you're going through, we know what you're suffering and why you're suffering, we understand what you have to do and why you have to do it. We understand how the IDF needs to attack Hamas, needs to attack Hezbollah, needs to attack the Houthis, and I could go on and on with all of the proxies of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I don't think that should be taken lightly, because the way that the international media presents it is that Iran and Israel are enemies, and what the Iranian people, the courageous Iranian people have proven, obviously before October 7th, but to the Jewish community since October 7th, is that they are lifelong friends through the centuries, and that they will continue to be. And I think that that is something that everyone needs to understand, both in the state of Israel and beyond, because we are facing the exact same enemy. And we need to stand hand in hand in combating that. I also want to add one more thing about that, and that is that oftentimes the Iranian activists, some of which are sitting here in the front actually, are on very much the front lines to tremendous risk to themselves. When we are activists in the United States or even in the UK, yes, there is a threat. We do get harassed, we do potentially face being doxxed, but that's not the same thing as having your family executed, or potentially you being executed or stabbed or targeted, even on foreign soil. And I know that some of the people here have actually faced those threats. And so again, it's not something to be taken lightly, this solidarity.
Yeah. No, it is incredible that, as you say, that we do face the same enemy, but at the same time, a heightened threat for our Iranian friends. So I know examples, I'm sure you do, of people suddenly receiving a phone call and saying, you know, we know where your brother lives in Iran, you know, that kind of threat. And it makes it, in a way, all the more urgent for those of us who do have freedoms here in this country to exercise them. This is one of the messages that we've been trying to put out with Our Fight and Stop the Hate, is the idea of that we are able to go out on the streets, we are able to challenge, we are able to make, to some extent, our voices heard, and we need to illustrate that to the rest of the country and get them also to make the same statements. So maybe we could, I don't know if the AV person could set the video rolling that we've got for Emily. Thank you. So Emily has some recordings and she's going to explain to us. We're going to stop and start.
תזיזו את הראשים שלכם מפה, תזיזו את הראשים. אוקיי, לא. מאמי.
So I should have gave you a warning in advance that a lot of this footage is very difficult to watch. But the reason that I wanted to share some of this with you and share with you in this order is because this is exactly how I woke up. I woke up to the missile alerts in Tel Aviv on October 7th. I live in Tel Aviv, South Tel Aviv. At the time, it was a little bit unusual to see rocket alerts in Tel Aviv, not really something we were expecting. But at first, when I heard the alarms, both Yosef and I kind of thought, oh, they're just, being a little bit more aggressive today. And then I looked at my phone, and this was the very first thing I saw. That video that you just saw. And I was very confused at first because if you look at it, you think maybe it's from Iraq or, Syria or I thought, why are people sending me a video of like ISIS? I don't understand, in the back of a pickup truck. And then I realized it was in Sderot, which made me even more confused because I was like, wait a second, what's happening? And this confusion of what's happening continued for several hours. And the reason that I think it's important to speak about this today is because there are a lot of very, very impactful stories from October 7th, and they need to be heard and they need to be told. But you also have to understand that everyone in the entire country was living in this fear for at least 4 to 5 hours. At least. We didn't know if Hezbollah was coming from the north. We didn't know if other countries were getting engaged. No, the police weren't, answering anyone because they were busy dealing with everything. The IDF was trying to deal with the situation in the south. So no one knew anything. No one had any answers. Even the people with connections did not have any answers. This started happening at, 6:30 in the morning, very, very early on a Jewish holiday. So we didn't really have any answers. And I think I woke up a couple hours after that. So this was the first thing I saw, and then that was shortly followed by the next video, which I'll share with you, which was from the Nova Festival. That was the next thing that I saw that morning at about 9:30 a.m. So this is footage of the Hamas paragliders that, parachuted into the Nova Music Festival, where 378 civilians were murdered from, I believe it was over 40 in the end, different countries, some of which were kidnapped as well. And again, at first when I saw it, I was so confused because it's hard to believe the savagery and the barbarity of what's happening. I think I spent most of the day in shock, but as the footage started to come in, and I'm not sharing with you the worst of it, I started to realize this is a very, very serious situation. This is not just rockets. This is something significantly more serious. I guess we're speaking in the dark now. And that's when I started to realize, okay, maybe we're actually in danger in Tel Aviv. Now, I know that sounds perhaps naive to someone not from there, but in Tel Aviv, you sort of have a little bit of a bubble where you think things aren't going to affect you. Even now, when you see the Houthis firing ballistic missiles, a lot of people in Tel Aviv are like, oh, let me video. People will continue sitting at the bar. They don't consider it so much of a risk. And this is when we realized something is going very, very wrong. And not being able to get a hold of anyone, not being able to have any answers, answers. It was really, really terrifying because we didn't know how far they were going to go. And then we started seeing videos come in of executions and of kidnappings, and I think we have another video here, I'm not sure.
Well, before we show it, sorry, I was just going to ask, because you're describing your experience in Israel, and obviously from people I know over here, the lack of information and the fear and the worry about relatives over in Israel. And obviously, as you say, so many were killed, so many were kidnapped, and people related to those victims not knowing, do you have relatives outside of Israel? Do you have people that you were constantly phoning you and all that kind of thing?
Almost the entire day, almost the entire day. In fact, I think it became a little bit of a way to cope because I was so much in shock. But that occurred really much later in the day. The videos I'm sharing with you now all came in pretty much in the first couple of hours that I started to see. And then once we saw the footage from, the Telegram channels of Hamas and from the other Islamist networks that I follow as a journalist, we realized that this was very, very quickly spiraling out of control. And we started to see the executions. We started to see the kidnapping videos. I don't know if you already played it, but if you could show the footage of what they were doing to the hostages, what the Gaza civilians were doing to the hostages as they were paraded on the back of pickup trucks into the Gaza Strip. So when people tell you that, Gazans are the victims, I just want you to remember this. Of course, there are innocent people in Gaza, but the reality of the situation, unfortunately, is that more than 87% of them, according to the multiple polls actually immediately after October 7th, showed that they supported Hamas and explicitly supported the actions of October 7th as well. I'm often asked in interviews if it's kind of like the Gazan people are like the Iranian people and they live under oppressive dictatorship. The opposite is true. The vast majority of Iranians are against the Islamic Republic, whereas the vast majority of Gazans support Hamas. And part of that is because of an extensive network of brainwashing and radicalization from cradle to grave. But unfortunately, that is the reality. And as unpleasant as it is to admit and to say in the West, we're not doing ourselves any favor by pretending otherwise. And you see the same phenomenon here when we're dealing with different Islamist groups. Just before I came here, I was having drinks with some friends, and they were talking about the protest that was planned tonight, and the group organizing it is literally called Intifada 87. Yeah. Why on earth would the British police approve any protests being organized by a group called Intifada 87? Intifada literally means violent uprising. There is no such thing as a non-violent intifada, okay? Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying or doesn't speak Arabic. That's the only thing it can mean. So the tolerance, this tolerance of intolerance is harming us. It's killing us. It's killing us in Iran, it's killing us in Israel, it's killing Gazans as well, and it will kill people in Europe as well if they're not able to get a hold of this issue and to take it seriously and to hold these people accountable.
I think that's a very good way of putting it, the tolerance of intolerance. And the glorification, in fact, of some of these things, as you say, calling your organization Intifada. We hear it chanted whenever we go and do counter-protests, one solution, revolution, and globalize the Intifada. And so could we have the next, is this a photograph?
Yes, so shortly after October 7th, I was not in the South. Later in the afternoon, we had started to get more feedback about what was happening on the ground. Obviously, throughout the day, we saw a lot of interviews even coming in on live TV, people who were hiding in bushes, people who were hiding in, crazy places and bizarre situations, calling into major networks in Israel, reporting on what's happened. Horrific, unimaginable scenes. Unimaginable. And I think both Yosef and I spent the majority of the day in complete shock. And I remember that for the first time, we discussed where we would go, how we would get out of the building, what we would do if Hamas came to the front door. How I would get out and what he would do. He was armed, so I said, okay, well, I will go to the other balcony, and they did. They actually did have plans to come up to Tel Aviv, and bizarrely, in a tragic turn of events, Nova actually stopped that. The Nova Festival actually prevented them from getting further, along with the actions of some very, very courageous policemen who called some shots without the proper protocol to shut down the roads. There's certainly no shortage of acts of heroism on that day, remarkable acts of heroism. But we do know that after the fact, from the documents that the IDF has obtained from Hamas in Gaza and from subsequent interrogations, that they did have plans to come to Tel Aviv. And not only that, but they had a whole setup for how they were going to force people out of buildings and how they were going to, execute and kidnap even more people. And about a day and a half after that, October 9th, there was a missile that was fired at Tel Aviv that had a direct hit on the building next door to me, in the Florentine neighborhood, leveled an entire building. And at that point, we had been hearing sirens for several days, almost nonstop. And as a reminder for anyone who forgot, Israel did not respond to what happened on October 7th until October 27th, which is why anyone protesting today is not protesting for Palestinians. They're protesting for Hamas, and they're protesting in support of the acts of violence against civilians on October 7th. But we did have a direct hit right on the neighborhood, and I have to say, I've never been in a situation like that. I've been in multiple wars already, but I really thought that they hit our building because it felt like an earthquake. Like the whole ground shook, and all of the living room was like covered in smoke, despite the fact that there wasn't anything on our building. That's how impactful it was. And the second that we went down after, the required time to stay in the bomb shelter, which is actually my bedroom, the other siren went off, back-to-back sirens, so we had to run back upstairs, back into the shelter. And by the time we got down there, about 20 minutes later, I, of course, went to report about what was happening. There were a few people that were trapped under there for about 5-6 hours. And that was the footage the photo that you saw just a few minutes ago. And it was only about a week and a half later that I went to report from kibbutz Be'eri in the south for the first time, also Kfar Aza, several of the communities that were hardest hit. Significant portions of their entire population were wiped out in these communities. And it's difficult even to this day to describe what the scenes were. I've been to Auschwitz, I visited it, it's horrendous, but the feeling, well, it was kind of reminiscent of that. It was much more visceral because there were still body bags in the area. They hadn't even cleaned all of them out. You could smell death. I've never experienced anything like that. I remember physically being ill the rest of the day after seeing it, and walking into some of these houses just in the immediate aftermath of what had happened on October 7th. And I think they started playing a little bit of my footage that I took from inside some of the houses. You could see bullet holes almost everywhere. In almost every house, there wasn't a single house that wasn't destroyed in one way or another. You saw houses that were completely burned all the way down to the ground. You saw bomb shelters that had been firebombed. You saw children's beds that were covered in blood, obviously right here. That's one of the examples.
That's not on there.
We'll
play that in a second. So just to go into it a little bit more, because I think sometimes we explain these things, and hopefully a lot of the people watching the stream, some of the people here won't be that familiar with these things. So maybe we could go into a little bit more. So you're talking about Be'eri. There were nearly 120 people murdered at Be'eri.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people know this, but the population of Be'eri was, I think, 1,000. So when Emily says a significant portion of the kibbutz, that's 120 people out of 1,000. So basically, you're talking about a village in the middle of nowhere in Britain, equivalent. To find somewhere with a population of 1,000, I looked it up on the internet, you've got to go way down the list of places, populated places in Britain. So you're talking about a village, called a kibbutz, but it's basically a village. And you're talking about 120 people. So the number of lives affected by that, not just the number of lives taken. I mean, it is, I was going to say decimation, but it is literally a decimation.
And unfortunately, it wasn't only one community. I mean, there are many communities in this area, all very small and close-knit communities that suffered this way. And you know, Kfar Aza and Kibbutz Be'eri were some of the worst. They were some of the first ones that I visited. But it's the scale of it is just very, very difficult to grasp until you've actually been there. And you know, some of the photos that that we shared just a moment ago, I don't know if you saw the blood on the floor. That's actually someone who was stabbed.
Sorry, should we play that?
Yeah, it's on the screen
here,
now.
But could we? Oh, here we go. Yeah.
This is someone, one of the residents of Kibbutz Be'eri, who was stabbed, tied, and then burned alive. Also, the children in the home were burned alive. So it's really some of the most horrific human cruelty that I think I've ever heard of. Just really, really savage barbarism. There's no other way to explain it. And it's difficult to even witness it or speak about it years later, despite the fact that I wasn't there. So I can only imagine for people who this was their family members, or you know, they were there, they did survive in some of these horrific situations. It's excruciating. It's excruciating to see. I have many friends from some of these communities, and again, we weren't able to hear from them in many cases for many hours, or if we were, you know, they were locking themselves inside bomb shelters and waiting for hours and hours and hours and hours for the army to come, for the police to come. I've interviewed first responders who lied to people all day long, telling them that the police were on the way when they knew they weren't on the way, or they weren't able to get there in time. I mean, just unimaginable human suffering. And you see here, this is a photo of me speaking with some of the soldiers on the ground there, but the home that's behind me in that photo is not unusual. That's how every single house in that kibbutz looked. It's how almost every single house in every kibbutz on the Gaza border looked. The scale of destruction it's very difficult to comprehend, and it breaks my heart that there are so many people here who are trying to deny exactly that, despite the fact that there is not only so much evidence, but that they boasted about it, that they live streamed this. There were people who found out that their grandparents or their loved ones were murdered because they did it on live stream, on their own social media. There were terrorists who took the phones of people that they murdered and called their parents to brag about how many Jews they had killed. I mean, some of the things that I can't play here, I can't display here, are sickening, physically sickening. And you know, there's been a lot said about the videos that the IDF screened for journalists at the beginning. Some of that footage has been released since then. But I have to say, even though I got a lot of this content, as a journalist, I saw a lot of this content on October 7th itself. Some of it I actually reported on in real time. Watching that video and watching some of the footage that we hadn't previously seen, that hadn't been released, it's the only time in my life that I actually threw up after seeing something. It's sickening is the only way to describe it. And on top of all of this, on top of all of the tragedy that happened on October 7th, we saw scenes like this. This is what was going on in Gaza at the time. This is how they were responding to the videos that were being sent around by Hamas. This is how they're teaching children, as you see in this photo, to behave, to be raised, to behave, that the slaughter, that the rape, that the kidnapping of innocent men, women, and children is something to be glorified. And I think the biggest tragedy of all from October 7th, beyond the loss of life, which of course comes first and foremost, is that we have seen the international community completely turn their back on these hostages and completely turn their back on their own values. Because this is not something that should ever be tolerated. It's not something that should ever be normalized. And when you see people, like I saw today, chanting at, King's College and SOAS and all those campuses they walked across, chanting for Intifada, chanting for From the River to the Sea, which necessitates the elimination completely of the State of Israel. I don't know how you can look at that reality as a government, like we see today, and say, oh yeah, we should support a two-state solution, when they are the ones opposing a two-state solution.
So I have to thank you very much for sharing all of those stories. That was incredible. I hope people will share these stories. There's more stories to come, but I hope you'll understand the very visceral experience of people like Emily in Israel on that day, and help us to get the message across. And thank you for helping us to get the message across.
Thank you.
I'm going to leave the stage as well in a second. Thank you so much.